Hello everyone, I'm Bruno Liebhaberg, Director General of CERRE, the Center on Regulation in Europe, the think tank focusing on the regulation of digital, mobility, energy and sustainability value chains. This morning we talk about transforming the public sector for Europe's digital decade. The modernization of the public sector, of public administration, has been going up at different level and different speeds in Europe, and with different levels of success as well. When you look, for instance, at the 2020 United Nations e-government survey, which highlights the list of leading countries worldwide in e-government, you find among the top 10, you find 5 member states. Number 1, Denmark, and the others being Estonia, Finland, Sweden, and the Netherlands. So the others are following suit, and to discuss this and to discuss the transformation of the public sector and its adaptation to Europe's digital ambitions, I'm glad to have today for a conversation with Marc Reinhardt. Marc Reinhardt, good morning. You are the global head of global leader of the public sector with Capgemini, the big consulting firm. So perhaps the first question I would have for you: what is the state of digitalization of the public sector in Europe today?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Very happy to be here. Very exciting times, especially also for digitalization in Europe. We just published the EU e-government benchmark that did exactly those kind of surveys, who's ahead, who's not, which is not really the important thing. The important thing is, do we all make progress? And that clearly has been the case in the last year, thanks to, in a way, COVID. Everybody had to digitalize before. For example, when it came to electronic document management systems, before it was sometimes a task that people didn't want to do. Why do I have to do it? I have my paper files. But with COVID, it was essential to even be able to stay in business. So now everybody understood, to video conferencing, collaboration tools, everybody knows it's necessary to stay active, to stay in business during crisis. So everybody accepted it. Huge steps were made. We show it clearly in our data in digitalization during that time. But on the other hand, to have a digital offer is only half of the success. To actually have a value for the citizens, you need to make the offer in a way that people also use it, and when they use it, they're satisfied with it, and that we clearly also showed there is still some room to go.
But what are the goals? What are the main goals and the main challenges that Europe is facing with the digitalization of its public sector?
Yeah, I mean, they have set themselves goals with a number of strategies that they have pursued already during a number of council presidencies, very strongly also driven by Estonia, but now also with the German Berlin Declaration and also with the Lisbon Declaration. So what they really want to do is, first of all, make sure that most and especially all of the key government services that citizens use are available online, and they're also available to use cross borders. So that's really the focus of the EU, plus, and that's part of the discussion around the single digital gateway. So once you have nationally those services available, you need to also make sure they're connected, so also other EU citizens can access them. For that you need portals, for that you need authentication possibilities with e-IDs and so on. So it's a whole range of things to actually be able to transact in one go digitally, because today often it's partly digitalized. So you have a portal, you may have an online service, but at the end you need to print out the document, you need to manually sign in and mail it. That's not the goal of it. The goal is to really end-to-end, start-to-end, have it all digital.
Let's talk perhaps about a number of concrete issues. The first one, perhaps data. We hear a lot about data-driven government.
Yes.
What is being done to put our citizens or businesses or society in control of the data, of their data, which are being stored with the government entities?
Well, that's two different sides of the same coin. On the one hand, governments, they still sit on huge amounts of data, but they only use it very sporadically, depending on the country. Because of the fear of data protection, they basically, and I know the German example very well because I worked with it for many years, they basically ask for the data for the concrete case that you want to transact with them, and after that they ignore the data basically, even though they already have it. So next time you do something similar, they ask you for the same data again. So that's in a way good in terms of control of the data for the citizen, but it's not very convenient. So that's why now they need to find a balance, and that's common all across Europe, with the once-only principle that was also decreed by the EU, to say every information you give to the government, you should only give once, no matter what agency, and they should be able to exchange among themselves. But if they do that, it's very important that then the citizen doesn't lose the control over the data. So it's on the one hand, it needs to be clear that the data can only be exchanged when the citizen has agreed to it. And second of all, that there is something, and the Estonians, for example, have a very good example of that, that they have a data cockpit where you can actually see who has done what with your data. So you can track and see why did they use my data for that, and if you're not satisfied or if you don't understand it, you can ask.
The key issue there is trust, of course.
Absolutely.
Because it's a trust not only in tech,
yes,
but beyond that, trust in government.
Absolutely.
So it's a democratic challenge that we
yes,
are talking about.
Absolutely. It's exactly what you say. It's about transparency, and transparency creates trust, and trust creates also acceptance, creates a positive spirit towards government, towards democracy as a whole. You have to have the feeling that the government is acting in your interest, and what we see, and what we've seen also through the COVID crisis, not just in digitalization, if you have trust in your government that they do the right things, you will allow them more easily, more generously to use your data to advance societal purposes. And the less trust you have, the more you're reluctant, thereby hindering the progress. And in the COVID pandemic, we've seen it. Some governments that had a lot of trust, like the Danish, for example, from their citizens, they were able to implement measures to help the society much faster than other countries where the population was very skeptical. And I mean, one example you can see is also in Southeastern Europe with COVID vaccination rates of only like 20 to 30%. That's also a matter of lack of trust in what the government says, what the government does, and digital can do a great way to help that.
So we can perhaps make a link between the issue of successful digitalization of society and governance, acceptability
Absolutely.
of governance. It's not surprising that the Nordics are among the five in the top 10 in the list I mentioned. We were talking about data. Let's move perhaps now to cloud.
Yes.
There are also efforts to build a public cloud. Alors, what can you talk about those efforts and why public? Why a public cloud would be better than a private cloud? And can you enlighten us on that?
Yeah, it's a tricky issue in terminology, because theoretically the public cloud, as the IT world talks about it, is what Amazon, Google, and so on do. But what we're talking about here is that the public sector establishes its own cloud. To differentiate between these two, we usually talk about a sovereign cloud. So a cloud that is set up by the government and controlled by the government, but still works like a public cloud. Because the alternative is actually a private cloud, which is not one by private organizations, but it's one that is private, meaning it's like a cloud, but only for myself. And so, for example, security organizations, defense organizations, today they have that. It's a virtualized environment in which they operate their data. Instead of having one server for one data, they have a bunch of servers on which all their data resides. That already gains a lot of efficiency, but it's only half the way. The true benefit of a cloud, to be able to collaborate more easily with others that use the same mechanic, the benefit of having it quickly ramped up, which we've also seen in the COVID crisis. A lot of schools had to go to hyperscalers, because those services, they could quickly put all their students on a school cloud offered by the hyperscalers, whereas the government that had to build it up in a sovereign and safe way took very long. So if you manage to combine the two benefits, to have a cloud that is on the one hand fast enough to work like one of the hyperscalers from the Silicon Valley, but on the other hand, fulfills all the requirements that you want, that to make sure that none of the data, sometimes very sensitive data, health data, leave the EU, leave your country, then you have to build those kind of sovereign clouds. And that's a very popular topic that also was raised and promoted by Gaia X, for example. So there's a lot of traction behind that. And I think it's a good way because Europe takes charge of its own destiny.
But what is there are connectivity challenges which are related to that?
Yes.
There are technological challenges
Yes.
which are related to that. Is Europe in a position to address those challenges?
Yeah, I think Europe has shown, and it's getting more and more confident with the GDPR that if they set rules, if they set boundaries, even though in the beginning there was a lot of talk about it, people did belittle it a little bit, were smirking about it, it really made an impact. And it's a similar thing now with, for example, Gaia X. They clearly said, this is the way we work. And I think it's a very European way. We stay open, we don't exclude. It's not about protectionism. We stay open, but we define the rules how within Europe people can operate. And here's a set of rules. So Gaia is, contrary to what many people believe, it's not a cloud offer that Europe is doing. It's not like a government-run hyperscaler. But it's a set of rules according to which many different entities can connect each other to one virtual hyperscaler. So it's open. It allows also the Americans and to some extent also even some Chinese players to connect to it if they follow certain rules that will be also tracked. And if they do, then it's fine. But you have full transparency, again, coming to trust about which service you use and depending on your own requirements, what you want to do with the data. If there is maybe even some compliance issues, that some kind of data it's legally not allowed that it leaves the country or the EU or so, then you can choose by like a marketplace, you can choose to have a European provider for it. And for some other data where you say, I just need it to store it somewhere, like if you have open data, geodata or so, and it's not security critical or anything else, you can also just take an offer from anybody else that is maybe a little bit cheaper or can scale up faster or so. But you have transparency and then you can make an informed choice, a sovereign choice.
To achieve success in the digital transformation of public sector in the European member states, what are the number of things that are needed? Let's try to list them together. What do you need? What would you have on your menu to make it a success?
Well, I mean, the first ingredient for a digital transformation in Europe, I think, and it sounds profane, but it's always true, is money. And the Recovery and Resilience Facility and everything that went with it is a great tool. So that issue is checked. Money is available to an extent that is sufficient. Also, it's great that combined with that money, there was a clear ambition that this money has to be used for a transformative effort towards digitalization and sustainability. Let's see how the EU manages to ensure that the money is also spent that way. That, okay, I think, is one of the open issues. So then you need, of course, the member states and the players within the member states that now formulate the right kind of programs to address that challenge and to address the transformation and to spend that money wisely. What I think also we will need is a lot of exchange, a lot of dialogue between countries that show what they do with that money, where it provides most impact, and then do more of that rather than less. And in digitalization, that's one. In sustainability, it's going to be even more important. They spent nearly twice as much in the RRF on it, 37 versus 20% of the whole package. And I think it's very important that also there we have a good exchange, which countries do what with that money, where the money is spent most efficiently, that we get the biggest transformational impact from it. And at the end of the day, what I think is very important is that we do it together. It should be a joint effort between the governments and the Commission, between civil society to some extent also, they should be part of it and included in it, and the private industry. That really, I mean, also comes about mobilizing capital. Only when we all work together and direct it to the same goal, then we will make an impact.
Moving to perhaps more micro level, the contents level, we need skills. What is? Can you say something about that?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the other important aspects, and so maybe I should have started with that instead of the money. The money, as I said, at least I relativized it. It's profane, but the skills, that is really very important.
How can we get the competences necessary?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's interesting to even understand where we stand in the competences today. We have to identify the gaps. I've seen that in the Digital Europe program, for example, they talk about setting up a skills data space. So that's already a good tool to really get transparency about where we stand on the data. Then we will need to define what the goal is, what kind of skills will be needed, and then how we can move people there. Of course, new people that come in the market, we need to train them the right way. But the biggest effort is that we have to retrain and reskill so many people. So one example that also I've discussed repeatedly in the last few weeks is that, for example, employment agencies that historically were managing unemployment and just like matching jobs with demands, they will have to shift towards basically reskilling qualification agencies. And that is one of the changes that we will see. There are education and qualification platforms that are being formed in the governments to address offers in a way that, for example, citizens can very easily, with a very low threshold, consume trainings on their own, like at home. It's a little bit, we need to make it more accessible, because we cannot send everybody off for weeks and months to new trainings or send everybody off to university again.
What about standards and norms? Are there efforts to be made there at the European level in particular?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned it earlier with the Gaia X example. Those are basically rules. I mean, it doesn't always have to be a standard, but we need to agree on a set of rules on a way to how we work together, especially in the European way, how we do things, which is we want to stay colorful. We want to stay who we are. It's a collection of different member states that have their own profiles, and we want to stay that way. We don't want to be uniform. And for that, you need to be interoperable. And to be interoperable, you need to agree on how Part A of the European Union talks to Part B, technically. So there's a lot of discussion that will need to happen on standards, but there's already a good basis for it. So we should, on the one hand, use the things we have. Often we have good examples, and we certainly have good examples in the member states. So let's not try, and that's my appeal to all the member states that are listening, let's not for every new topic try to create a new standard, but let's first look, and I'm currently involved in a project in one member state that is doing that, to first look what are the standards that are already out there? Has the EU already got one? Yes or no? And if not, has a country already defined one that is used maybe by other countries and that is usable? And then let's use that. Let's get others to use that too and unify on that, rather than going first defining your own and then sitting for years and years agreeing on how we can make those match.
What about the regulatory boxes that are that are necessary? We have the GDPR, which I suppose is helpful. Do you see any other missing regulatory blocks which would help in this transformation of the public sectors, in the digitalization of public sector?
Yeah, I mean, there's already many blocks that are being discussed, from the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act. There's talks about the regulation on AI and so on. I think it's important to set those boundaries, to set those rules, but we also should make sure that we don't stifle innovation that way. We have to be flexible enough. And I mean, I think DMA and DSA are totally fine, because they define also the rules how other non-Europeans work with us. But for example, on AI, it's good that we make a clear vision, a clear image of how we want AI to support us and work with us. AI for the people and not the people working for the AI or being abused by the AI. So I think it's good to define that target picture, but let's try to only gradually maybe increase the regulation on it. Let's see how we can make it work. Let's not try to just trust the promises of the industry forever, but let's not try to put the maximum pressure on it from the beginning and thereby discourage people from following it. So we need to find the good balance.
in 30 seconds, because I think we need to close. I heard you talking about the transformation of the public sector would meet the needs of citizens and business and enhance Europe's digital sovereignty.
Yes.
Why? Digital sovereignty. What is the link there? 30 seconds.
Yes. I think it's important that Europe, and that's my definition of sovereignty, takes its destiny in its own hands. It should not be the playing ball of others. And to do that, they need to define what society they want to live in, what goals they want to achieve, and need to organize themselves to also get them. In the past, often we said, we complained about that things are the way they are, but now I see with the IPCI, with Gaia X and other initiatives, that Europe is putting their money where their mouth is in a way, spending and setting up initiatives that also are broadly based with many constituents to jointly form that path. And as I said earlier, if we manage to align the governments, the industry and the civil society along those goals, that's the European way, that's how we can succeed, and that's how we can stay sovereign.
And that's going to be your conclusion. Marc Reinhardt, thank you very much.
Thank you.